Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Whenever you happenstance this incredible panel discussion with the 47th episode of the new Untouchables. We're recording this on Friday, November 21st, 2025 at approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And boy, do we have a lot to discuss on this particular panel, so we'll get right to it. Just a couple of introductions on my screen, and this always changes because of the way Zoom works. We have Mark Dan from Dan Law Firm out of the great state of Ohio, former Attorney General of Ohio. Welcome back, Dan. We missed you.
Thanks
June
for having me.
Carbone, June Carbone, right below him, of course, the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. To her right, Lewis Clark, the Executive Director of the Government Accountability Project. And then, of course, the indomitable Bill Black, William K. Black, a gentleman who's got so many things to discuss that it would take up the entirety if I introduced him. I'll just say he's a resident expert in all things fraud, corruption, and he is the North Star to help lead the way. As we get started on this particular recording, guys, I want to say happy pre-Thanksgiving to everyone, first and foremost. I hope all is well with you and your family. But I want to just comment on a couple of crazy things that have really been tumultuous this week. I think last Sunday we started with, of course, President Trump down at Mar-a-Lago, a little bit befuddled but baffled, and also as, shall we say, happy as ever to discuss the Epstein files. And then, of course, after 4 months of sitting on the sidelines with saying there's nothing to see here, folks, after his campaign said that that's what they were going to do, of course, to elicit the response from MAGA. Of course, we got the decision, I think, a few days ago on releasing the so-called Epstein files and everything that will reveal or not reveal, but particularly as it relates, obviously, to cherry picking. And of course, in the political knives are out in every direction. But it also bears bringing to the forefront, of course, this insanity with Lindsay Halligan as it relates to, of course, James Comey and Letitia James. And then, further, that was really interesting. I don't know, interesting so much, but in terms of the reaction to seeing Mohammed bin Salman in the White House with Donald Trump in the midst of all of the Epstein files and everything else that, were basically being questioned of both. But it was really intriguing that there was a question from an ABC reporter regarding one, Jamal Khashoggi, and two, mention of the 9/11 families, which was it elicited quite a response. But I will say, just for the viewers out there, that I found it very interesting that Mohammed bin Salman had addressed for the first time that I'm aware of 9/11, and he had made a statement that the whole point was that obviously Osama bin Laden had been trying to drive a wedge between the Saudi kingdom and, of course, the United States, and of course Trump and Mohammed bin Salman are doing everything that to maintain the relationship and the strength of the two countries in the midst of what I just brought up. So really elicit a lot of emotional response. But further, yesterday we got news that the Coast Guard has decided to no longer have the swastika or a noose categorized as symbols of hate. And then furthering that sort of feeling about what was taking place in the Oval Office with Mohammed bin Salman, all things Khashoggi. Of course, Donald Trump threatened Democrats for treason, all things considered, which is certainly plenty to consider. And then, of course, today the judge ruled that the National Guard should not be in D.C. and so forth. I'm going to share my screen real quick just to draw attention further to the front page of the New York Times this week that I'm going to have to get to the right spot here. And let's see if we are there. Yeah, quickly, the unraveling of the Justice Department. So, as those of you who have been watching these panel discussions week in and week out, you know that we have a lot of folks with a lot of experience at the Department of Justice. And the New York Times came out with a pretty detailed chronological expose on really all things that are happening with pressure from the Department of Justice to with all things that are relevant to what we have learned, of course, through the Government Accountability Project and all things Eris Ravini as it relates to Emile Bove is siphoned here. But further down, I mean, I'm just going to scroll through this without actually citing anything, but I'm just drawing attention to this incredible detailed article about insiders, which we might consider whistleblowers at the Department of Justice, that are talking about every form of unethical activity or lawlessness or illegal activity that I think we'll be able to address here quite a bit within this dialogue today. But also, I want to draw attention that one of the folks here that was cited is someone prominent in Ohio who has gone over and above describing incredible pressure from the Department of Justice to do what I think is practically illegal behavior. And then just on the up note, though, as we move forward through all of this corruption and everything that just we're deluged by every day, I found this to be good news, guys. A fraudster pardoned by Trump gets 37 years for running a Ponzi scheme after he was pardoned by Trump. So in the midst of all the darkness and everything else, there's a light of hope there at the end of the tunnel. And I think we should get started with you, Lewis Clark, from the from the Government Accountability Project, to maybe just respond and address some of these things that I know you're deeply involved with.
Well, yeah, certainly our focus has been the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice and Voice of America, and we have a lot of insiders, only a fraction of whom have gone public. But I don't think anyone's really done a survey of what the attitude or the thinking of the employees at the department. But everything that we're seeing certainly is that the morale is not only really low, but there's also a determination on the part of a significant number of people they're not going to participate in moves that are obviously political rather than ethical and moral and lawful. So they're just not going to do it. So I think that are going to see continued turmoil. I think it's going to get much more, much more acute going forward. Right now, of course, we're representing Eris Rovini, who's whistleblowing who was in charge of, or essentially the deputy in charge of, the immigration cases at the Department of Justice. He's been there 16 years, has a stellar record, won a lot of awards for his prosecutorial talent. And then all of a sudden he was put in a position of being ordered to essentially lie to the court. He refused to do so. He refused to say that Garcia, who has been much in the news, was wrongfully sent to El Salvador. So Eris refused to say that he was a member of a gang because the evidence was not there to prove that, and that he was not an extremist or a terrorist, which they were also trying to get him to say, and he refused to do that. In addition to that, he told the truth to the judge that it was a mistake that they sent that man to El Salvador. In addition to that, he reported to much news throughout the country is that the number 3 official at the Department of Justice had told at a meeting, as a high-level meeting at the Department of Justice, he told the people in the meeting that it was very important that they send those plane loads of detainees to El Salvador, 197 men, to El Salvador to be tortured for 4 months, and that those planes had to take off. And if a court ordered them not to do so, we might have to say, fuck you to the courts. And so now what's happening is the judge in that case it has gotten the green light from the Court of Appeals to continue with a contempt investigation and inquiry, and there's a real potential that he's going to find the Department of Justice and certainly certain officials there at fairly high levels, that he's going to find them in contempt of court, criminal contempt as well. And so he's being asked now to testify at upcoming hearings that will happen in the next few weeks. And that's really what's really going to happen, because he's obviously not going to be the only person to testify. But what's really going to happen in the next few weeks is the entire Department of Justice is going to be on trial.
Wow. And I think I want to get your reaction, June, from the standpoint that, just to kind of slip this question in context of what Lewis just laid out. I mean, that's a pretty incredible thought, to put the DOJ on trial. My goodness. But look, this last week, we literally saw that Democrats had suggested to service members to not follow illegal orders in addition to this, right? And so we saw a couple of weeks ago as well, there's a whole lot of people, I think, within the Department of Defense that probably are facing similar scenarios. You want to pick up on some of those thoughts?
Sure, and I'd like to put in play a couple of longer term issues. The first, I had been saying before the election, and indeed been saying for some time, there's a wholesale assault on American institutions that really started with Newt Gingrich, and McConnell accelerated. So when you look at the Obama administration and McConnell taking the position, we're not going to vote on anything that might help Obama get reelected in 2012. This mindset, we only ask what's in it for us, is deeply rooted and has been there for a while. And I've been saying the last institution left that still stands for honor, for integrity, for putting the mission and the people around you ahead of yourself is the military. Indeed, to an Israeli friend, I said the military, the last institution left that still represents feminine values of care for others, self-sacrifice. And of course, it's close to the top of Trump's hit list. The second thing, and Lewis is absolutely part of this with whistleblowers, is we need an agenda for restoration. As you know, if you've been listening to me all these weeks, I've been saying it will take, last time it took 2 world wars and the Great Depression. This time, let's hope it's only a financial crisis. But when I've been saying that, it's not just to take down Trump. Trump is the representative of a movement. Now, 15 years ago, I described that movement as the rich, the religious, and the racists. The way they fit together today is a little bit different, but you still have an overlap between the old Reagan coalition and the new Trump coalition, and they're a little bit different. But what they have in common is the richest people in the country who want to be freed from the Lilliputians, including the Justice Department, who might tell them there's some things they can't do or some things for which they might be accountable, are only too happy to sign on to Trump and the destruction of the American experiment and what makes America great, in order to be freed from the Lilliputians and the Justice Department front and center among the Lilliputians. And it is that coalition that needs to be defeated. What it means to restate, to rediscover, to bring back institutions means not just defeating Trump, but defeating the people who finance it. The third point, on a note of worry. So, like everybody else, I love listening to the people who say Trump is about to collapse. And, the latest on Midas Touch about how he's losing it mentally, I listen to him and I don't see any of this as any different from Joe Biden. He's old. All of the flaws he had when he was younger are now worse. But what I found more compelling is something that came from somebody commenting on what happens when people become ill, physically ill. They're deteriorating. Yes, they develop dementia-like symptoms, but more critically, they become more impulsive. They become, they feel a greater sense of urgency. And if you take Trump, who is a narcissist, The only thing that matters is what's in it for me. Anybody who defies my orders is a traitor. To whom? To me, and I'm the country. And you take a sense of urgency. Uh, hey, I might lose in the midterms. I've got to rig the system now. And the fact that the guardrails are gone, that the people who might have reined him in aren't there. Then what I see with this statement that Democrats are committing treason, he thinks anybody who didn't vote for him in the last election has committed treason. When you see those statements, the question is this a further sign that he's off the rails? Not necessarily because of dementia, but the project is a totalitarian project. And so I see these statements as a sign. There's nobody editing Truth Social posts in the middle of the night. There may be people who fail to carry out his orders. I am told that their primary source of distraction is to get him to focus on rebuilding the East Wing and the ballroom rather than, say, foreign policy or domestic affairs. But that means we need to ask who's running the country. And it is the sadist, Stephen Miller, and it's the right-wing ideologue, Russell Vogt, who thinks if poor kids starve to death, that's a good thing.
Right, which I might interpret, to be honest with you, is, in the case of, Stephen Miller, whatever billionaire, sort of consortium behind the scene that created this sort of petri dish experiment at Breitbart, first and foremost. And then when you think about Russell Vogt, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago, I mean, this guy, came up through Phil Graham's office, right? So as you laid out this continuum, we know exactly where they came from and who they serve, right? So, Paul, given your professionalism in your decades-long fight in the trenches at the highest levels of the Department of Justice, I found myself, I mean, it's, again, I love to reference the fact that you've got a great sense of humor, but there's nothing funny about this, right? But at the same time, the ineptness, the just ridiculous unprofessionalism of everything that's associated with this administration, the buffoonery, it's so off the rails, as June just described. I mean, I don't think I have to wonder about it. I'm happy to say it's off the rails. How do you even compartmentalize this, and where do you want to go, given all the stuff that we just heard from Lewis and June as it relates to the Department of Justice?
Well, I'd like to correct two things, something that Lewis said and something that June said. June said that Trump was a narcissist. He's a malignant narcissist, and that is far, far exponentially worse than a narcissist. And Lewis says, well, the Department of Justice will be on trial. The Department of Justice has been on trial since this administration started, and they have failed every step of the way. And I do agree with Lewis that this is going to be the corruption of the Department of Justice on trial before. Is it Judge Boasberg, Lewis?
Yes.
Yeah. Because he doesn't suffer fools well, and he's a terrific judge. And I think that what we're seeing here is what we all of us who are lawyers know, that this is what happens in court. You can't say stuff that's not true. And you can't, if you're a prosecutor, you can't even hint at something that might not be true. Your obligation is only to tell the truth. So when the court in Virginia had to suss out of the prosecutors that this indictment was returned without having been reviewed by the entire grand jury, the new indictment was reviewed, that was not something you should have to suss out of prosecutors. They're supposed to come forward and tell you things like that. I heard from people that when Halligan announced in the courtroom that the indictment probably wasn't seen by the whole grand jury, but was just seen by the foreperson and another grand jury person. And I don't know what role that person had. I heard that because there was a ton of former prosecutors in the courtroom, I heard that there was a gasp in the courtroom, like, how crazy is this? So I think that the Department of Justice has been on trial in every form for months and months now. I think they've actually failed every test. We have commentators regularly on TV calling it the Department of Injustice now. I think we've talked about how many generations it's going to take to rebuild this. I think since our last communication, our last podcast last Friday, we've learned that now the figure is 5,000 prosecutors or 5,000 employees have left the Department of Justice. That's an incredible, if that's true, that's an incredible number. It was reported in the New York Times. And one other number that I heard that was deeply compelling is that the number of people dead since they shut off money to all of our foreign assistance programs is over 600,000. That's extraordinary. And I don't think we've ever experienced anything like that in our lives. So from the Department of Justice perspective, I agree with Lewis. It's on trial. It's going to fail. It has failed every test. And the question really is where we go from here. And I don't think that for the next 3 years, we're going to really be able to find our way through repairing this Department of Justice. It's lost right now.
You guys called all of this stuff 6 months ago, and I'm going to turn this to you, Bill, because those numbers, I remember hearing from Mark or Paul at the beginning when he said millions of people are going to die because of what Doge did to USAID. And I thought to myself at the moment, oh, he can't be serious about that number, can he? And then I'm like, oh, wait a second. And you guys have been every week, weeks in front of the mainstream press. And suddenly the New York Times this past week, right, explores how many people in media, as are every podcaster under the sun, how every mainstream media person has failed to inquire about, at the bare minimum, all of these things that we're being questioned about now with obviously the Epstein files. And this group of elites that are above the law that have been able to handle this thing with all of the magnitude, of course, the financialization structure underneath. And of course, this last week, ironically, and no pun intended, Donald Trump, in terms of, okay, we're going to make the Epstein files public, one of the guys that are top of the list are none other than, Jamie Dimon, right? And all things considered. So, Bill, I'm sure you've got plenty to offer. I don't want to say anything more than what I just did. I can't wait to see what you have to say.
Okay, so start just what you've already been discussing. What Paul was doing with that friendly amendment, adding to malignant, is what psychologists call a constellation of behaviors. And they tend statistically to be linked. And that's why there's something that's the ultimate predators. This is the dark tetrad. And when the CEO in particular, and the psychologists think that CEOs fit into the dark tetrad about 5% of the time versus the general public about 1% of the time, right? So when we say don't just focus on the king, we got to end the robber barons, this is what we're talking about. So these are folks that are not just narcissistic, but they're also Machiavellian, and that they are psychopaths or sociopaths. That word changes in the literature every 5 years, bouncing back and forth. But the fourth one is that they're sadists. And you can see at the absolute top levels, the folks who are really the presidents, directing policy, the malignant policies and such, that's the common thing they share, that sadistic element. They really hate America and Americans and the whole concept of democracy. Their heroes are MBS. I mean, we just had the President of the United States denigrate the victim who was not just killed, but tortured and dismembered to be killed. And the President of the United States dissed him and praised the person, even though his own administration, not this one, the last time he was in, found that MBS was in fact in charge. All right. So I've mentioned when you're trying to, if you're an honest CEO, it's actually kind of hard to weed out dishonest people because they have an incentive to hide it. But if you're Trump, if you're a league of predators, you want dishonest leaders everywhere. And so the simple screening test is the best. Are you willing to lie about the attack on the Capitol? If you're willing to lie about that attack, if you're willing to take the worst criminals from that and eagerly facilitate them getting pardons, not just pardons of their crime at the Capitol, but even prior crimes. And some of them are now recidivists the third time around already, right? That gives you, at the senior leadership, reliable slime. And that's the hard part. Because two things that are true that are in tension. Paul is absolutely correct that the Department of Justice has failed, but the Department of Justice attorneys have overwhelmingly not failed. Right? They have acted in many ways superbly. They were willing to take up positions that we really identify with. Again, a number of us are alums of this. We were super proud to be these kinds of attorneys. It's a great job, interesting cases. A lot of your identification is with that position, and they've been willing to give it up. They've been absolutely unwilling to lie. They are the threat as Trump looks at them. And an example of this, but switching it now just from the Justice Department realm, was shown by the Democrats who come from national defense and intelligence backgrounds, and that video they made, right? That you can, and one of them appropriately said, you must refuse to go forward with an unlawful order, right? And then they said, don't give up the ship, was their tagline at the end. So a little history here. So first, that phrase, don't give up the ship, that was in the War of 1812, we tend to lose all the land battles, but we did relatively well in the naval battles, many of which were on the Great Lakes and such, the parts of the world that Jude and I come from. So that famous phrase, don't give up the ship, well, he died, the guy that gave that offer, and they gave up the ship because, not because they were defying the order, but because it had just become pure slaughter. They were not able to inflict any more casualties. It made no sense to continue with that order. They fought as long as it was, you could mount any kind of defense. And at that point, when it simply became a slaughter of the troops, the sailors, there was no reason to continue. But more importantly, and I'm happy to pass off at whatever point, Lewis, you want to take this over. This is the most famous thing at the origins of whistleblowing in the United States, which go back to literally before we had a constitution. When we had the Declaration of Independence and we were fighting the war, we had a whole series of whistleblowers come forward and against an incredibly prominent person, a person who politically was of the sort of the royal family of Rhode Island. His brother had been a delegate and was now the governor at the time this is happening of Rhode Island, and was an immense power. And the guy was wealthy. And the Continental Congress named him our commander-in-chief admiral of all our naval forces, which weren't vast at that time. He began a whole series of awful actions, and 10 mostly sailors and Marines came forward and blew the whistle. And they came to the Continental Congress. But first, he, the admiral, used a quasi-civil, quasi-criminal device to actually imprison them. So it's a sort of a criminal libel action in those days. And the Continental Congress passed a resolution, which Lewis can tell you all about how we on that date, have done modern resolutions built on it. But that resolution, I'll just quote the key word. It said all of our troops had the duty is the word they used, to come forward and blow the whistle. They didn't use blow the whistle, that was a modern phrase, but to inform the Continental Congress of these abuses so the Congress could act and prevent the continuation of the abuses. And the Continental Congress recognized that this very rich Rhode Island top admiral was also using his wealth to go after penurious whistleblowers. So it actually took U.S. funds to help fund their defense. The antecedent, again, of a whole bunch of laws that we only got back to centuries later. So I'll just stop there, but they are absolutely wrong. And the criticism that George Washington would have hung them is a vicious lie about George Washington and the quality of the Continental Congress. We were better than this in our origins. The Uniform Code of Military Justice says that you can be prosecuted as a principal if you go forward with an illegal order. It also says it is a defense, although a little free advice. It's a difficult standard, manifest standard. So we're not pushing people that willy-nilly to breach orders when they don't have, really superb cases that the order is illegal. In any event, if this is something where the congressmen and senators for the Democrats were absolutely right, and the people that said, no, we should be executing people who refuse to commit crimes were as wrong as possible. And I'll turn it over.
Mark, I'm going to guide this to you, but I just want to say in this transition that I continue every week to be inspired by all of you. Every one of the people on this panel have spent decades in the trenches fighting the good fight for integrity and justice, and the reason many generations later from what Bill just described, and you're no exception to that. You in your own right in Ohio did what nobody else did, right? In terms of what led us to you in the con. But further, you've been there, done that. You've seen it all. I know you have, as an attorney general, and also in politics, and also in all of the other elements that your long career in Democratic politics in the state of Ohio. And we've talked offline about the things that have been brought to the fore by Alex Gibney, of course, in Ohio Confidential. And I know the cases that you've been involved with corporate law and the heavies in the racketeering and all of these other elements. But I would imagine even you, who has seen it all, what we're in the midst of has got to feel next level. And I'll just pick up on one last thing, given what Bill just said, particularly as it related to the Coast Guard yesterday. Again, I remind the viewer that the Coast Guard has just made it I guess that swastikas and nooses are no longer symbols of hate. So what that means that people in
No, they just under public pressure, they just flip back on that.
Oh, they did. Okay, well that's good to know, because I was thinking maybe it translates to tattoos or whatever.
Oh, really? Now they'll have to take all the swastikas off the boats.
The tattoos, they're going to be hard. That's painful.
Yeah.
Well, so enough said, Mark. I look forward to seeing where you run with this.
Well, I mean, we live in extraordinary times, and I don't know that I have a lot to add to what Bill and Paul had to say about this. I can tell you this, on the Comey indictment this week. I got a call from a colleague who does probate work And he called me late at night, late last night, and said, "Look, you know something about prosecuting people, and my wife can't understand how where on the scale of absurdity is it that a grand jury would vote on an indictment that they haven't seen." And I said it's unheard of. But so much of what we rely on depends not on the letter of the law, or the strict proscriptions and requirements of the Constitution, but on a developed set of expectations and history and precedent that's developed over hundreds of years. And when you encounter a group of people that are willing to just discard that, it's like trying to prove a negative. It's like trying to I mean, it's like trying to prove, to argue that nobody's disproven that autism is caused by vaccines. Well, nobody's disproven that cats aren't born from umbrellas either. But that doesn't mean that it's true. And so you've got a combination of as and I love June's summary of the components of the Trump coalition, the racists and the rich people and but the rich people have been planning this attack on conventional oversight of their behavior for 40 years. And Trump is really their chump in all this. They are pulling a grift on the grifter. He is carrying out their wishes, and when you talk about vote, I mean he's their he's their man on the inside, as you would say, executing all this. But they understood all these years that if you just stripped away the tradition of honor and integrity, and precedent of behavior that's civilized, that their businesses could go unoverseen, and the public would go unprotected, whether they're consumers, whether they're babies sleeping in unsafe cribs, whether they're they can just regulate, let the market regulate itself. So that's, I mean, I think that's what we're seeing here. And it's creeping everywhere. When you put somebody in a federal grand jury, who's a civil defense lawyer, and because nobody that works for her is willing to walk in the room with her to get the indictment that the boss wants to get, all history and precedent and convention goes out the window. And so that's how these kinds of things can happen, because there's just a complete willingness to discard that history and that precedent and that respect for tradition, that every word of everything we do in the legal profession isn't written down. And frankly, it's a great reminder for us as lawyers, as practicing lawyers, that we can't rely on that we have to make sure as we represent our clients, that we prepare for the possibility that there will be players in the game that will discard those things. The one group that has managed not to do that so far are judges. The buck has literally been stopping on the desks of federal district court judges, who have refused to play that game, who have refused to allow the game to be played out in their courtroom. And I think you'll see that with Comey when they dismiss the indictment, because of the way that it was it was done. Now, I just saw a news flash that the Trump Justice Department is now backing off the statement that the grand jury never saw the indictment. Now all of a sudden they're changing their story. And that's the other thing. I mean, he's also managed this time around to surround himself with people who would just say anything. Somebody who will stand with a straight face and defend him calling a reporter a piggy yesterday was just an amazing. It was. I don't mean to be flip, but it was an amazing thing to watch. This is the press secretary of the United States of America. I mean, I'm a big West Wing fan. I could just if C.J. Craig was really alive, the press secretary on the West Wing, I think her head would have exploded yesterday. With the defense of that the defense of calling somebody a pig. In commenting on their personal appearance by a president of the United States into trying to distract from the question that the president doesn't want to answer is an exercise in honesty and integrity. I mean, that's what I just knocked my camera down. I'm so exercised here. But that's what we're looking at. And so this total disregard of all that. Now, here's the problem. And frankly, the problem is not just of the appointed officials in the Trump administration and those that haven't stood up and blown the whistle and walked out the door or raised or refused to the illegal orders, because that's not just a military thing. Should be and is an expectation of every government official to not recognize or follow an illegal order. So that applies across the board in government. So those people are at risk if rationality is restored in 2028, and a president will appoint people who have respect for the history and precedent and traditions of those offices. They'll be subject to potential criminal exposure. And the corporate officers who have been bribing their way towards the expansion of their businesses internationally through the tariff gamesmanship, domestically through the removal of regulations, those that have bought their pardons or bought pardons for other people. They're all subject to criminal prosecution in the next administration, and it won't be a Trump-like retaliation for bad behavior. But this would be legitimate prosecutions for truly bad behavior, and I think those folks need to think about that. I guess the news flash of the week is the Democrats in Congress have dumbed down finally to a meaningful message, which is stop following illegal orders. Now six of 535 Democrats what is it, like 200 and 300 and some Democrats, but nonetheless 6 Democrats have actually communicated to the public what the heck, not only what is wrong, but what to do about it. And I think what we're onto here, that I hope people around the country will start to emulate and to talk about, is we're all about creating the world where those whistleblowers, those who refuse to follow orders, have a community that will back them up every step of the way. I mean, Lewis does this for a living and does God's work through Democrat administrations and Republican administrations and on and on. But we need to multiply. We need a force multiplier here to provide that support for those people that are willing to say no, and to refuse those illegal orders, and to stand up for tradition and precedent. And we lawyers need to police our own. And I know I don't want to lose track of that, Bill. I know you've been very adamant in these conversations about this, and I am too. But those, these lawyers that will lie and misrepresent in court and stand up in front of a judge and lie, the very integrity and ability of the justice system to work depends on court officers telling the truth. And when they don't tell the truth, there need to be serious consequences. And all of us in the legal community, anybody who doesn't advocate for that, who doesn't report it when they see it to the appropriate disciplinary authorities, they ought to be disciplined too.
I'm going to just pick up really quick, but first and foremost to the public, please. That's why these folks are the new untouchables, because I know you're all thinking, and I'm seeing this in my own social media circles. I'm having it in conversations with some important people. There is an absolute hunger for, shall we say, the mythical American hero to step into this moment in history, and you're looking at him. And so for the next, I don't know, let's call it whatever you guys want to cut up, but I'm just going to leave it open-ended. You guys really do a wonderful time when you just mix it up. Anybody want to start off the conversation and react and drive us to the next, just free flow?
I just want to set up others. 3 words and 1 number. The 3 words are Fort Pierce, Florida, and the number is 30 investigations apparently already started by subpoena. We have seen honest judges push back. We are about to see what happens when you have a dishonest judge combined with dishonest U.S. attorneys. And the results could be horrific.
I don't know that judge in Fort Pierce is presiding over the grand jury. She likely is, but I'm not certain that she will be called upon. But she likely is. There's only one judge in Fort Pierce, but they rotate assignments through West Palm Beach. So that would be interesting to see.
And I'd add on whistleblowers, something to keep an eye out for. People in the FBI and the Justice Department who find out what is in the Epstein files that is being deleted.
I think that's going to be important. Also in terms of the earlier discussion or the discussion about illegal orders, the difficulty with that concept is the proof is going to be on that individual that it was illegal. And that's one of the areas of which these people who do step forward are going to need help. They're going to need considerable help to be able to prove the point of why they chose to or were compelled by duty to disobey that order, because there's going to be enormous pressure on them, and there's going to be, as we've seen, throughout the government. I think we've seen things that were blatantly illegal be explained away, by officialdom, even though obviously it's a lie. But basically, these people are going to need that support, and that's going to be, they're going to be needing that support and that help. But if they get it, and they are able to essentially prevail on proving the point that it was indeed illegal, then we're going to have a lot more people coming forward. So I think that it's really the community. I think the community of concerned citizens who are going to preserve this democracy, standing behind and with the whistleblowers who have the inside information about the levels of corruption.
Yeah, can I add to that? The Defense Department has fired the top officials who advised soldiers on what was legal and what isn't. I'd like to know where they went. And you have National Guards all over the country who face some of the same issues. I'd like to see the states hire some of those experts. But blue states collectively could hire some of those experts and be a resource for people currently in the military with questions about what's legal and what isn't legal. I don't know if anybody's doing that.
And whistleblowers are the ace in the hole potentially. because these clowns are so bad that they, have continued to say things in front of honest people who
Yeah.
themselves end up being whistleblowers. And if they can testify that, there was a signal and they deliberately use signal to delete the written documentation, but they were present and heard that comment, then that could really turn this around in an enormously big way. And eventually, I would love to make them paranoid about whistleblowers, right? Because then they would stop taking so many illegal actions for fear that it will end up in them being imprisoned. Because they obviously don't care about their reputation.
I, I think that we're seeing that at the highest level of government in terms of, if you're willing to step forward and say that people who are told, or people who tell people that you can follow and should follow the unit, the code of conduct for the military, that you're supposed to, and it's your duty to not obey illegal order, that's your duty, and that and the response to that was so over the top, exactly because of that reaction, that fear of whistleblowers. So you have to do something that's going to scare the bejeebies out of anyone, and the idea of being hung and be, is a pretty much of a disadvantage or a disincentive, put it that way, to step forward.
I do have a proposal. I think the United States should declare that Donald Trump is guilty of war crimes and invite the rest of the world to seize his golf courses in Scotland.
Oh.
They're money losers. You don't want those.
Or the new Saudi investments.
Oh, yeah.
No, but I would like to see 50 flag rank generals and admirals make their own version of it and say that, you have slandered George Washington.
Yeah, I would like to see that, but but that's not what we don't need them to do. What we need them to do is just to tell their higher ups, and hopefully the Congress.
No, I mean
as well.
former. I mean former.
Yeah. Oh, former. Yeah, absolutely.
Former.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I thought you were talking about people who are now on
No.
duty. Yeah. Okay.
No, that
Okay.
that would be a very bad idea.
Yeah, that'd be walking the plank for no reason.
For no reason.
Yeah. You don't have First Amendment rights really, or limited First Amendment rights
Right.
when you're in the military service. Talking about policy, I guess, and politics.
So is everybody good for their final comment? Everybody good? Okay, so let me just offer.
I have one other thing. I hopefully it'll be very brief, but I think that we were talking, or it was brought up, the idea of solutions. And I think that one of the things that we really need to work on is that every scandal that we're now seeing, one after another, needs to be, as we've said, needs to be investigated. And there's two aspects of that investigation. One is the reform on the scandal itself. So that's resolved, and addressed. But secondly is what guardrail would have prevented that scandal from happening. And then our goal for the next 10 years is to reestablish those guardrails that that allowed that scandal to actually occur.
Yeah,
and I
we
think
call it the
that's
restoration phase.
Yeah, and I think that's what our job is here, actually, on this panel, is to think in those terms as well.
Patrick, I think that's a great topic for a future discussion for an entire session.
Yeah.
Well, then it's a good one to do, and we will, Ms. Carbone. Thank you. And I will just say this in closing. I know there are so many of you that are overwhelmed. You're lost in translation. You don't know what can be done. You don't understand some of these big pictures nor the granular details. These folks do. What you can do is you can share everywhere We need thousands to hundreds of thousands to eventually millions. We need anybody who is on the right side of American history in positions of media to come out to go further with these folks. And I will, of course, be a great vector to that. I can help everybody out in any which way I can. In fact, we're following the same, I would say, everything that William K. Black achieved under much harder circumstances during the savings and loan crisis by reaching thousands of journalists and educating them on how things are run and what the crimes were and what could be done. And then they ultimately embarrassed the country into action that led to indictments, that led to convictions. People, we're better than this. We're better than this monstrosity of this ghoulish ridiculousness every single day that's a stain on our history that we cannot tolerate. And I am so incredibly grateful for this incredible brain trust to enable me to bring them to you, and we will continue to do so. So please check out thenewuntouchables.com. Please check out thecleannewdeal.org. And until next week, happy Thanksgiving to you all. We'll get through this together. Onwards and upwards. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.